again, but I want to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. We are, I guess, a couple months into 2022. For those of you that are local, we're going to try to get a meetup together for a happy hour, so not an official Derby City Agile meetup, but hopefully we can get something scheduled and sent out for folks that want to join that. As we continue into 2022, we are looking to possibly do an in-person meetup. We do have a one-day conference scheduled in the fall that we'll be talking more about here shortly, and you'll be able to see that on LinkedIn or through the Meetup group. And for those that don't know me, I'm Jay Brown with Smart Data. Anna Kepshire and myself organized Derby City Agile Meetup. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Anna and let her introduce our guest today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Kepshire. I own KEP Training, and I get to work with the wonderful Chet Hendrickson and Damon Poole. And I want to introduce you to our speaker. It is John Saxon. John has been part of the KEP family for about 5 years. We love John. So John has been, a senior director. He's helped global companies with their agile transformation. He's super passionate about agility. And we just love John to death. So we're super excited to have him as a speaker. So I will hand it over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you, Anna and Jay. I can't say enough about you guys, what you bring to the community, bringing people together to talk about things like this. And I'm not a presenter. I'm usually here as a participant. And I get a lot from these. So hopefully everyone here will get a lot from me, and I can share a little something. But in your trainings, the certifications you see on the screen, most of those come from Anna, Chet, and her other trainers. And, those are just world-class, great trainings. It's taught me, the basis of what I know, and then, got the rest of their experience. So I've worked with a lot of Agile teams over my career, and I've got a lot of different experiences here. And this is what I've sort of put together as a culmination of a lot of that work, a lot of that experience and that learning. So I hope you get a lot out of it. Feel free to ask questions as I go through. I designed this originally to be more of a discussion. It's turned into more of a presentation, but I welcome comments as we go through, and I'll also try to save time at the end for just a general discussion. So let's get started. My screen will change. There we go. So when we talk about system thinkings, I want to back up just a little bit and say, how do teams adopt Agile? Like Anna says, I've been involved with Agile transformations from companies that were waterfall and then trying to go to Agile. I've been with companies that were Agile and really, really good at it. I'll probably brag about a team I had not too long ago that was really the best team I've ever worked with. They knew what they were doing, and they were really good. And I've been with organizations that are trying to adopt it for quite a while and getting there. So I've got a lot of different experience from different perspectives, but one thing I see in common is sort of this path that they take when they're adopting Agile. And it starts with using the tools and techniques correctly. Right, so you have stand-ups, you write user stories, you do refinement, you have planning meetings, you do all the ceremonies of Agile. And I used to think that was actually the starting point, and where teams would start to develop their Agile skills. But I found, as I worked with more and more teams, that there's a previous step to this for some teams, and that's using tools and techniques incorrectly. And it's funny, you see, planning meetings or grooming meetings that are in the wrong context. Maybe it's I had one team that it was a scrum situation. They had multiple scrum teams working on one product, and when they did refinement, they all the teams got in there. So one team would show their stories to be refined or groomed, and everyone's there, but most of them don't care about it. So, there's a lot of ways that you can use the tools and techniques incorrectly. And that's a lot where people start, but they start trying, which is the important part. The important part is to try to use the tools correctly. But eventually they get the hang of it. They start to realize, what these events do and what they're for, and they start using them correctly. But they don't understand quite why they're using them and what this is leading to and exactly the purpose of all the things. So the next sort of level that I see happen with groups as they adopt Agile is they start to adopt the Agile mindset. They start realizing, oh, now I understand why I'm doing refinement, because if I don't do refinement, then the story might be too big. It might be missing information. There might be problems with it. So that when I get to planning, then planning can't be successful because we don't have the right information at the right time. And then we have to kick the story back up, or the team doesn't accept it. There could be a lot of things that happen incorrectly, but people start realizing that, oh, we do refinement for this reason, we do planning for this reason, and if we do these things right, everything starts to run a little smoother. So, but it happens more at an individual level in my observations. People start to get it sort of one by one. The next level is multiple people start getting it, and groups start to understand as a group why we're doing something. That's when teams can become very effective. So you get Scrum teams that this is why we do it. We know what we're doing. When we're in refinement, we know what the purpose is, and we follow through with that. And that's when this team really starts to perform well. But it's just the team, right? The team can have issues with its inputs and outputs. Mostly if it's performing well, mostly it's inputs. But that can also mess up a good, well-running team. So once these groups start to understand how they're supposed to operate, they might start questioning, why do we have this policy? Why do we even do this way? Now that we've moved into this agile transformation, this policy no longer applies. Or maybe they're structured incorrectly. Had one team that testing was not part of the definition of done. So the team would actually develop the stories, and then it could be tested 2 months later. And if a problem's found, it had to circle back around. That's a huge feedback loop, way too big. Should be much faster than that. So people start to question, why are we structured this way? And then the metrics used to analyze the teams, those metrics could be incorrect. Had a team once that they measured how long a ticket was on the board, so on the Kanban board. So if the ticket were to roll, they closed it and opened a new one instead of literally rolling it, because they didn't want it to show that so they're cheating the system basically. But the metrics need to be right. Is that a good metric? Maybe, maybe not. But they start to question some of the metrics. They haven't adjusted those to more accurately measure the team. And then the last sort of level that I see is the culture starts to change. And we'll get more into this as I go into the presentation. I wanted everyone to understand sort of, this is the path that I see people take as they adopt Agile. And system thinking really starts to apply at the mindset level, the policy level, and the culture level. And it's a step back to say, how are these things working together? And what might we change to improve what's going on? So, and it's a mindset of the leaders. It's not necessarily a mindset of the team. So while the team is going through these steps, so are some of the leaders of the teams. And that's where we're really going to approach today, is how do the leaders need to change their leadership style to best have well-performing, healthy, agile teams. So that's where we're going to go from here. So now let's talk about, what is systems thinking? It's a holistic approach to analyze an analysis that focuses on the way that the system's parts interrelate and how systems work over time within the context of a larger system. So that's a mouthful, a big definition. Basically, it's saying, instead of command and control and closely trying to control how teams operate, let's take a step back and let's look at the larger pieces of the system and see how they relate to each other, and watch for things to happen and more handle those situations as they happen versus deep diving in. I'll go through some examples and we'll deep dive into this a little bit more, but in a nutshell, it's stepping back to look at how the bigger parts of the system work together. So how does this relate to agile software development? The teams themselves are pretty much a system. sorry, so having an issue there. The teams themselves are a system themselves. They produce software as a system. You have different groups within the system. You have developers, you have testers, you have architects, you have the business, you have the inputs, you have the end users, you have these different parts of the system. So it definitely applies here. A common misconception about Agile project management is that because of its reliance on self-organizing teams, there's a little or no role for leaders in Agile teams. And that is very much a misconception. Now, I've got a quote on my slide here. It's out of a book called Biology of Business by Philip Anderson. And he says, self-organization does not mean that the workers, instead of managers, engineer the organization design. It does not mean that letting people do whatever they want to do. It means that management commits to guide the evolution of behaviors that emerge from the interaction of independent agents instead of specifying in advance what effective behavior is. So independent agents, these things, these groups within the system, seeing how that they react to each other is really important here. So that's system thinking, taking it back, looking at how the different parts of the system work together. So what is a system? You know, it's a group of interacting, related, or independent parts that forms a unified whole and has a specific purpose. So if you think of different things, your body is a system. It's actually a system of systems, right? You have circulatory system, you have muscular system, you have respiratory system, skeletal system. You have all these different systems of the body that work together that create you. So what do systems sort of have in common, or how do we define a system? And I think these are good to know. And let's compare this against developing software. Is that a system? And by the way, is the software itself a system? Actually is. But let's think about software development. Is it a system? All systems have a purpose. So purpose of developing software is to get value in the hands of the end user. So I would say yes, it is. It does definitely have a purpose. All the parts of the system must be present for a system to carry out its purpose optimally. Yes, if you don't have testing, then you're not going to produce very good software. If you don't have inputs from business, if you don't have the feedback, if you don't have potentially architects, if you have them that get involved, you're not producing optimal software. So it does take all the different parts to optimally produce the software. The order in which the parts are arranged affects performance of the system. If I test something and say, yep, it failed, and then I develop it, and then I don't test it, and I just ship it, then you got a problem. So organization is important. You can do test-driven development where you write the tests that fail, then you write it, and then run the test again, and it works, but you still ran the test before you ship. So you code, you test, you send. So yeah, it definitely, order does matter. You can't collect the requirements after you're done coding, for example. So yes, it definitely does, and applies to software. Systems attempt to maintain stability through feedback. That's the cornerstone of Agile, right? Feedback and shortening that feedback loop and understanding what's going on, that is critical to software development. So that absolutely does apply. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. But not many of the individual parts can produce, well, none of the individual parts can produce quality software. So I think that is also applicable here. In the sum, the system is subject to redefinition by changing the perspective. I was talking to somebody, not too long ago about that worked in the ops of a company. And they were always like, why does it take so long for me to get something changed in the software? What takes them so long? What's going on? And that person had recently moved in to the software group. And once they got to the group, they totally understood why it takes so long and all the steps and things that are involved in it. So definitely, I think changing perspective does apply here. Your architect might say the system's going to fall apart any day now. It's just a mess. But the end users are like, this is a great system. So perspective, I think, does matter in the software realm. So one other thing to mention is how does a system differ from a collection, just in case that ever comes up. But a collection, really, it's the relatedness and interdependence, and the existence of a purpose of the system. So collections typically are, you can have a baseball card collection. You take some of the cards away, it's still a collection, still has the same purpose. So you didn't change anything by doing that. It's the interrelatedness and the purpose of that really make the difference. So I've got a couple of quotes in here by Edward Stemling that I really think are applicable here, who's a big sort of systems thinker type guy. A system must be managed. It will not manage itself. Left to themselves, components become selfish, competitive, independent profit centers, and thus destroy the system. The secret is cooperation between the components toward the aim of the organization. So when we're thinking about systems thinking, this is where we really start to get into the meat. So we're looking at the cooperation between components. How well does the development team get value out to its end users? How well does the business get requirements or ideas into the development team? How are these things working together? Are the people happy? Are they doing well? But it has to be toward the aim of the organization too, right? If you're going off the aim of the organization is not going to be too happy about that. So I think that sort of sums up pretty good sort of where we're going with this and what we're wanting to accomplish. But when you think about the components of a dev team, you've got the dev team, you got people that receive the value, that's usually your end users. You have stakeholders, you have architects, you might have an operations group, help desk, testing, maybe UAT takes place, it's a separate group. These are all the groups that work together to develop software. And these are the groups where you're looking at how they work together when you're a systems thinker. So now that we know what a system is and sort of what system thinking is, we've sort of delved into that a little bit. Let's start talking about what we look for if we're a systems thinker. And I found this is actually a modified graphic that I've added to sort of this deck, which I like really well. So when you're a management and you're managing a software system, you have different things that you will observe. First off is events. Events are very reactive, and let's take this through an example. So a Scrum team does not deliver everything that they had planned in an iteration. They fell short. That's an event. That's a thing it's an occurrence that we encountered on a day-to-day basis. If responding to that is very reactive and is really not in the construct of systems thinking. But so those, I would say, probably best left alone for now. You could, if they missed it and there's a lot of pressure, maybe you tell the team you need to work the weekend or work extra hours to make up that and get that work done. Probably wouldn't be super popular with your team, but you could do that, excuse me. But at that point, you're just putting out a fire. You're not necessarily fixing the problem, which could be an underlying problem. You're just sort of putting out the fire. So the next thing is patterns and trends. So let's say the same team has now missed X number, 3 in a row. They have not gotten their sprint commitment. So now you've sort of uncovered a pattern. It's happened in the past. You could anticipate that it'll happen in the future. Patterns are basically accumulated memories of the event. And over time, they show that this is likely to keep reoccurring. Systems thinking can apply here. You may say, well, team, we told you, and you've seen before that when you miss, getting all your work done, that we need you to work the weekend and make sure you get it done. You could do that, but ask yourself this question: are you looking inward at the team, or are you looking outward for a bigger problem if you do that? I think that's one of the key things that you really got to keep in mind there is are you looking inward or outward? Systems thinkers look outward. They try to find a bigger, higher point to fix a systemic problem, which takes us into our next one, which is systemic structures or underlying structures. Is there a structure problem that is causing the team to continually miss what they're committing to? So maybe you dig a little deeper. The team's missed 3, so you go to the Scrum Master, ask what's going on. why is this team continually doing this? Why are we seeing this pattern? And the Scrum Master says, well, you know, we, as part of our definition of done for our team, before we can close a user story, we have to have a code review. And that code review is not done by someone on our team. And that person is always bogged down. We get on the list to show them, and we run out of time in the meeting, and we just don't get it done. Now you've found something by looking outside the team and you're looking at how the two teams work together. One, this person that's not in the Scrum team that's doing the code review, and this person, this developer on the team that needs, as part of the definition of done, to close that story so it doesn't roll, needs that review, which feedback could come out of, and they may need to make a change. But now you're seeing how these two groups are working together, and fixing that problem then solves the pattern, which solves the events, which fixes everything. That's really the root of what we're trying to get to in systems thinking, is trying to identify these high leverage points. How far can I follow this problem sort of through events to patterns to underlying structures, and maybe even into mental models, so that we can find the highest point to fix it, and then everything downstream, it gets turned around. And I've had this happen. Exact thing happened, actually. It was actually a demo meeting, not a code review. The code review sounded better. So that's what we're talking about here, is looking for that thing. And I'm going to go into a lot more examples and things like that as we go through the presentation. Okay. So the value stream. So we're going to apply this a little bit more. So we went through a high level. We've talked about events and the different things, the patterns and the systemic structures. But let's look more closely at the value stream. Everybody's probably seen this diagram in one form or another, where we loop around. We have a concept, it goes into the business gets funding or whatever it needs to do, writes down what it's doing, starts to determine size. Eventually we develop user stories, goes in the development team, maybe goes through ops and support, get involved. Hopefully you've got a DevOps situation where business and development are working closely together to define and manage the project. Gets to the end user, we get feedback, loop starts over. That is your basic construct of the software development team. I got a little saying at the bottom. It said that today's problems are yesterday's solutions. This is mainly a result of quick fixes we create without considering the overall system. It's responding to those events and not waiting to find the systemic issues that are causing those patterns and events. And that is really what I'm sort of speaking about in this presentation. Systems thinking, this is another Edwards Demling quote. Management of a system requires knowledge of the interrelations between all of the components within the system and with everybody that works in it. So you can't start measuring how well these big parts are working together if you don't understand how they're supposed to work together. It's sort of what we're getting to here. It's very, very important for these leaders to understand and go through training themselves to make sure that they understand what's supposed to be happening and the approaches they need to take to deal with the teams. If you don't, big problems can happen. So it's very important to understand the relationship between the teams. So let's get a little bit more specific and talk about very specific things that we can look for in an organization at a systems thinking level, these high leverage points that we can use to manage the teams. And this whole systems thinking thing, you might say, oh, I'm not a manager. I'm on a team, but I'm not a manager of the team. That's okay. These ideas are still relevant, and you might be able to affect the way you are managed by start bringing up different ideas. So I'm hoping that, as I go through these 6 or 7 things that I have that just sort of came to mind that I put in the slides, maybe some of these will ring a bell, and you'll start thinking differently about things and be able to invoke some change in your organization. So the first thing is culture. I talked about this earlier, said we get into a little bit more deeper, But culture is a big driver of an organization. It's a big systems thinking thing. It's very high level. If we can change culture, then you can really make some differences in the performance of your teams, especially if you're going from an old culture to a new culture. How are you going to get this change to happen? That's one of the toughest things that organizations see when converting to Agile. And I've got a slide on that too. So we'll get to that in a minute. But I've got another quote here. Attempting to change an organization's culture is a folly. It always fails. People's behavior, the culture, is a product of the system. When you change the system, people's behavior changes. So if we're going to change a culture, we've got to change a system. How do we change a system? Well, got a simple diagram here. The policies, structures, metrics, and tools that an organization uses makes up the system. The system, by changing those, you change the system versus changing the culture. So let's talk about these more specifically. Policies. Policies definitely have an effect on an organization, how you do things. If code is required to be reviewed and that review is needed before the ticket is closed, that affects how the team operates. I had one team that they had what they call CTQ checks. It was quality checks on the user stories. The user had to be properly formatted. As a user, I want to so that I can. It had to have acceptance criteria. It had all these rules about how a story had to look. When it closed, it had to have test cases attached and the results of those, good or bad, that affects how the team performs. That affects the system. That affects the things that have to happen and the route that a story has to take before it can be closed and moved to production. Structures. I gave a good example earlier of a structure that really wasn't working as well as it could. We had code review by an outside person that was bogged down and unable to get to the stories fast enough that they could be closed within an iteration. That is a potential restructuring of how that's done, potentially that could change the system and ultimately the culture of the group. How closely are the subject matter experts, the business side, the product owner, the team all aligned with each other? How is that structured? How do they communicate to each other? That's all really important. Changing that changes the system, changes the results. Metrics, there's a popular saying, tell me how you're going to measure me and I'll tell you how I'm going to perform. And I believe that. So the metrics put in place are very important. Like I said, I had a team that was cheating the system because you can't keep the story open too long, so we'll close it and open a new one just like it, so that they never had a story open too long. That's an example of a bad metric, most likely, or at least somebody cheating that metric. Metrics are very important. How are you going to measure a team? So as leaders, you're looking at this team and you're trying to create a performing team, a well-performing team. Have good metrics that measure the team so that you get the right results out of them. And when we get into team performance, which is one of my topics, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Tools. Do you use Jira? Do you use Azure DevOps to manage your stories in your system? How do you do your deployments? Do you have automation? What is your automation coverage? How much manual testing do you have? All of these things will relate to how the team operates. And these are high-level decisions that help this entity perform well. So a lot of times when you're systems thinking, you're thinking about like a team, but instead of a team of people, think of it as a person. How are you enabling this person to do a good job? And don't really dive into the team itself, but just think of it as a person. Sometimes that helps the system thinking. But what tools are you giving that team or that person that allow them to effectively do their job? So that's culture. Value is sort of my second point here. The main purpose of a Scrum team is to deliver value to the end user. I think we would probably all agree that that's pretty much the main purpose. If you're not delivering value, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Are the users getting the value? That's another question to ask. So now we're talking about how is this team, this development system, getting to that last step of delivering value to its end users. Are they getting, have you correctly identified the end users? I had a team that didn't really correctly identify the end user, and they were getting some great input and they built a system, but realized they were sort of talking to the wrong people, so they built the wrong thing. Luckily I wasn't on that Scrum team, but you know, are you getting the value to the end user, and is it the right thing? Is the delivery stream constant and consistent? That's a good measure of a team to some degree, is can I keep a constant pace and constantly deliver software, or are they, you know, just not ready when a new sprint or iteration starts? Excuse me. So being ready, being constant, being consistent is very important, and something that we can measure at a systems thinking level, because if they're not, then we can dig into, you know, are we seeing a, well, you will dig in if it's not just a one-time occurrence, an event. If it is a pattern, you might start wondering why this is going on, but look outward, not inward. Find us in and see if there's a systemic issue that's causing the inconsistency in the team. And again, when I get into performance, I'll talk a little bit more about consistency and what I think of that. Is the feedback loop as short as possible? You know, the one team I mentioned had testing that could be done 2 months later. Not a very efficient feedback loop. Feedback loop should be very quick, similar to the length of your iteration. You finish it and you get your feedback in system demo, or through dealing with users, or something being deployed to production, and working with your subject matter experts, product owner, and other people like that. Feedback should be pretty consistent and constant. If it's not, then there's probably a problem between these two large things that are trying to work together: the end user, or subject matter experts, or stakeholders, or whoever it might be, and the team developing it. There's something misfiring in there, and trying to back up to find the systemic issue is the way to analyze that. Is the feedback being heard? So you might be getting the value, at least initially, out to the users, but are you listening to what they're saying? Agile teams, a lot of times, most of the time, will be altering what they're doing as they go. It's the whole purpose. If not, we'd be waterfall. We could just spend 3 months to design it and 9 months to build it, and we have it done in a year. But the whole purpose of Agile is that most of the time we do that, we don't build the right thing, because we weren't listening, we didn't have opportunities to receive feedback. So once you start this tools, you adopt these tools, and that's another mindset thing, really, is getting that feedback and understanding that you're supposed to get that feedback, and it's okay to change your path. That's a mindset thing at both the team level and the leader level. The leader might say, the Agile team might understand, yeah, well, we've got some feedback and I think we need to change direction. And management might say, no, you're going off the plan, stick to the plan. Again, it's a mindset thing. And then that's systematic. And then if you realize the team's not hearing the feedback, if you apply systems thinking and say, well, why not? It's because when they go to management, which is me, I'm telling them they can't. But you may find that out through the subject matter experts, or the PO, or somebody that, you know, the team's not adapting to the feedback very well. So it's another area of systems thinking, backing up, looking bigger, finding the systemic issue. These may sound familiar, and they are. If you recognize this sentence and the background behind it, then you may realize this comes from the Agile Manifesto. I think the forefathers, or whatever you want to call the people that invented Agile, that came up with this and came up with the Agile Manifesto, they were system thinkers. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So this is exactly the example I just gave. Are they delivering the correct value to the correct people? We deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference toward the shorter time scale. Frequently, consistent, constant. Another one of the bullet points that I had there. Again, you know, if that's not happening, try to figure out why. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, users must be able to maintain a constant pace. Again, constant pace, right? And if they're not, something to look at. Business people, developers must work together daily throughout the project. That's the getting the feedback. That's understanding what you're doing and applying that feedback. And progressively elaborating on the stories and getting them ready and following the process and getting them ready to be executed within a sprint or an iteration. So a lot of these come from the Agile Manifesto, which is does allude itself to systems thinking. So my next item is performance. How is the team performing? I think one of the best measures of performance is predictability. I think if you're going to measure anything on a Scrum team, I'd start here. And it's not velocity. And why not velocity? Because velocity can fluctuate based on a lot of different factors that are beyond the team's control. Velocity could actually go up and down based on someone took a vacation, someone was ill. You know, I truly believe in Bruce Tuckman's law of team formation. If you're familiar with that, where you know you have the forming, storming, norming, performing, and sometimes adjourning levels of team formation, different states of team formation that teams go through as they develop. And basically the rule says that if you add a person to the team, then the team's performance will suffer for a short time. They go back to the storming phase where performance isn't quite as high until they get through that phase into the norming and performing phases, then they don't perform as well. And I'm a true believer of that. Again, I said I would brag on my well-performing team. I had a team one time that it was so well-performing that anytime we added a person, at the time I was the Scrum Master over that team, and I could adjust the velocity and almost nail what was going to happen. You add a member, that member starts asking questions of other people. And they actually, so they may have been at 100 story points, and you add a person, which you'd think you would immediately start going up, and it actually dipped. It went down to 90 or 85. And that's because that person starts asking questions, and people are helpful with each other, right? So that people are going to help this person get up and running. Well, if they're doing that, they're not doing what they normally are doing, which is working on a story. So you see this little dip in performance, and then as this person comes up to speed, you get back up to 100 story points and beyond, because this person is now joined. So again, variability in your velocity based on illness or a new person joining or a person leaving. All sorts of things can affect that and cause the velocity to actually fluctuate. How well is the team able to predict what their velocity is going to be is more important. I would rather have a team do 50 points consistently than one sprint they're 150, the next sprint they're 100, the next sprint they're 75, the next sprint they're 200. You know, that team's actually getting more work done. But if you're making promises to what the team's going to deliver, and you promise 100 and they only got 75, then you're going to have stories roll. You may have to go back to the business and explain why not everything was done on time. There might be some issues and some hardships that happen there. I like predictability. I'd much rather have a team predictable at 50 points because I know they'll get it done. I know I can make commitments and promises from it. And I think it's much more important. Now, there is variability in that. A team that can stick within 90% of its predicted velocity within a sprint is doing really well, actually really well. If they're within 80%, I would say they're also doing pretty good. Probably leave them alone. Outside the 80%, 81-20, then you probably want to start asking what's going on and start systems thinking. Start going up the chain and see if you can figure out why is this happening. So other things that you might see, are they completing what they say they complete in a sprint? Again, predictability. Are stories rolling, not finishing, rolling into the next iteration, next sprint? Always, never a good thing. Could be a lot of causes for that. Apply systems thinking and find out what's causing it. And can you keep commitments to stakeholders, I already said. All right, another big area. Team health. Team health, I think, is a big one too. As a manager, you are somewhat responsible for the health of that team. So things to watch for. How much attrition is there on the team? Software developers are, I don't know how everyone else is doing, but at the teams and the companies that I've been with, it's tough. It's tough to attain and keep really, really good talent. So how much attrition on the team is something to watch. If you're losing people all the time, something to look into and try to figure out why that's happening. How many hours is the team putting in? If the team is constantly working beyond what they're supposed to, say 40 hours a week, then you probably have an issue there, because then that's going to start the attrition. So you want to find out, why is that happening? Apply systems thinking. Are heroics common or rare? And by heroics, I mean that person that stays up till midnight working on an issue because it's critical and someone says this has to be fixed. So, how often does that happen? It's fine. Heroics are gonna happen. But if they're happening all the time, that's a problem, and that needs to be looked into. And how do you reward heroics? I had another example, had a team one time that it was actually during ARPA, which is, so they did Health Insurance Administration. And ARPA came out, which was President Biden's relief package for COVID-19. And it changed some of the COBRA rules. Basically going, if you'd worked for a company, long story, but you were worked for a company, and now the rules of COBRA can change, and even though you weren't on it anymore, you might be eligible to get it back. So we had to change the software to make that work. So in doing so, we were under some strict guidelines. It was a government mandate. To be in compliance, we needed to do it a certain way. Instead of choosing to do it manually, we wanted to update the software so the software would handle it. It would realize that you're a person that is now eligible. So when you came to the software, you could sign up. So there are a lot of changes need to be made. Heroics took place. We had teams working. I remember one particular sprint, we had a team basically work the entire Saturday to try to get something out the door. What did we do? We rewarded that. We gave them the next Friday off. It was not a popular decision with management, but I feel it was the right thing to do. It wasn't actually my decision. I weighed in on it, but we had a dev manager who let the team off. And he was fairly new to the company at the time. Took some heat for it. Team solely appreciated it. That kept the team healthy. And as a manager over your teams, does the team have what it needs to be successful? Are you providing training to the team? When I get to talking about some of the biggest barriers or troubles converting to Agile, you'll see some of these start to appear. The training. Are we training the staff? How knowledgeable are the teams? Where are they getting this knowledge from? All important as managers to make sure you're feeding the team, keeping them healthy. Tools. Do they have the proper tools? If you can't bring testing in because you basically are regression testing every time you do a release, then try to start getting automation coverage so you can sort of bring that in, reel that in. There's a lot of cases of different tools. I'm a big fan of Jira, love it. There's a lot of good add-ons to Jira that you can add into it that can help really, your long-term planning. Another horror story. How many places does your information about an item of work exist? So a story, that's one place. Now I had an organization one time where initially the story existed once when it was created, but that's not the story that was on the board. It was created a second time to move across the board. And it's the same one where if it rolled, we closed that and created another one. So there's 3 instances of that work item. From a reporting standpoint, there was a spreadsheet that kept a total of all that work that was used for management review. There was another spreadsheet called a dashboard that was used for management review as well. So now we're up to 5 places that this exists. And I can actually keep going. It existed, project managers had their own version of these things. Some of the leaders had their own version. So this had to be coordinated over the entire organization, all these things. There was really no system of truth because one could be saying one thing and one could say another. And for the people that got it, they were both systems of truth. So, Jira offers a good way to put it in one place, and from a planning to refinement to end sprint to closing, you could just monitor it all there. It was a great tool. Management backing. When something goes wrong, is management there to protect the team? Maybe an issue that you're looking into, but management needs to back the team. If someone is trying to force more work into the team, causing constant interruptions to the team, those are all very critical things to watch out for and make sure that you're not letting that happen. Every Scrum team I've ever worked with always gets distractions, but the goal is to keep those to a minimum, and how you handle them is very important. So watch for constant interruptions to the team, work coming in. It's so important, it must be fixed now type situations, and start to question if that's really the case. There is going to be those that you have to, but in my experiences, I found that a lot of them, if you start pushing back, aren't as critical. They can wait 2 weeks, and then you can take it through its proper steps. Refinement, sprint planning, get it into the sprint where the team accepts it, and do it the right way. Roles is an interesting thing about a team. I'm going to go back to my high performing team again. When I first joined that team, we had PO, Scrum Master, devs, a tester, an automation specialist, and 2 BAs. And it was about a team of about 10 or 11 people, I believe. And we had these specific roles. Scrum only defines the PO, the Scrum Master, and the dev team. There's only 3 roles. And most teams, though, have people that are sort of niched in different areas. And the developers can have specialties, like I'm better in we're doing coding here versus here. And that could be another division within the team. That high-performing team started to blend, and we started getting to generalized specialists, is what PMI calls it. And that's where the developers could test and the BAs could code, and the tester left the organization and they didn't rehire, and the automation person was learning how to write use cases. So all these things started to blend together, and that team was so well performing that if it got crunch time, we're near the end of the sprint, the developers started testing, and actually it became the norm that at the end that the developers test. They weren't big fans of it, but it worked very well because anybody could do just about anything needed. And the BAs sort of dissolved into a lot of testing, and one of them could actually code and write SQL really well. So, so how do you affect that as a leader? What are you hiring for? Are you going to replace that tester if they go away? Are you going to replace that BA if they leave the organization? How are you going to handle those situations? Those are big inputs into the team at a higher level and affecting how that entity within the system is working. And then information radiators. I said next slide, but that's cue to me because it goes on the next slide. Information radiators. How is communication happening on the team? Are they having to keep a spreadsheet up to date so that management can see what's going on? Or is your tool actually a place where the manager can just go and see what's going on? How many meetings are the team members in? Are all those needed? I think one of the number 1 complaints I've heard from Scrum teams is, I'm in too many meetings, just let me code. Probably a popular thing that a lot of people hear. And, I agree with that. And trying to keep unnecessary meetings. As an Agile leader, you have to think lean. Agile has its roots in lean. And you have to be a lean thinker as a leader to make sure that the communication is done well. Information radiators are a good way to do it. That means basically an information radiator is somewhere that someone can just go and get the information they want and not from a person. So they can log into Jira and they can look at it and they can see what's going on. And if they have questions, obviously they could come to hopefully the Scrum Master and find out what's going on. But use of good information radiators will help communication on the team. How many representations of the piece of work exist? I already sort of talked about that one. How are status meetings held and who attends? I think this is a really good discussion point. Where I had a very well-performing team, we actually had a lot of well-performing teams. It was in a Scrum of Scrums environment. And one of the best meetings I think we had was a meeting of all the Scrum teams, where it was really quickly done that each Scrum Master would give a report on how well the team performed the previous iteration or sprint. And that really got into and maybe this is something you try, maybe it's something that's short-term, maybe it's something that's long-term. But this was something that was put in place that really made the team focus on their commitment. I've had some teams that, we didn't make it, so what? But this was, you had to talk in front of all the other teams and say, yeah, we made it, yeah, we didn't. It's a really, really good thing to do, I think. I really enjoyed that meeting and thought it was very, very productive. But it was just a quick status report from each team. So how are those held? Do you have to report to specific project managers or project managers even involved? I've seen where they are, I've seen where they are. But if project managers involved, usually that amplifies the number of meetings. So not to speak poorly on project managers, but keep those to a minimum and look and find out what's going on when those are getting too much. And how does work come into the team? It's another thing to make sure that we've got it running smoothly there. Then one of my last things I think here is hiring. And I've sort of talked about this, but how do you backfill the team? What roles are you doing? And the idea of generalized specialists might be something that you want to consider. So when you really do have anyone on the team can do just about anything for the most part, or at least some part, then you start to see the team's performance go up. And then last thing is backlog. How healthy is the team's backlog? Is it 500 stories? Is it a little lower than that? A little bit more healthy, I would say, if it's quite a bit lower than that. How many defects? How are defects handled? That gets to how the groups within the system are working with each other. How's technical debt handled? Is the system stable? What's going on there? Another systems thinking, usually your architects and other people like that have input into the technical debt. How does that input get into the team? How are those two groups working together? Another systems thinking area to think about. What's the health of the hardware and software systems? Does the team ever refactor code? Are they actually going up and cleaning up some of the stuff that they write? And if not, is the system suffering because of that? Something that again, a policy that affects the system, that affects the culture. And then I said I would show this slide. This is sort of common things that are barriers to challenges experienced adopting Scaled Agile. Excuse me. Culture, we talked about that. Culture is big, but we sort of showed how to influence that culture, right? General organization resistance to change. So how do you combat that? Well, if you don't micromanage a team and you just sort of give them the organization's goal and let them sort of self-organize and self-manage, you will get a lot less resistance to change, I guarantee it. Inadequate management, support, and sponsorship. That's why I'm giving this presentation. Hopefully, I'm affecting that a little bit by doing this, and I do within my own organization. I'm always trying to help management realize how they work with this team and support this team. Lack of skills and experience with agile methodologies. We talked about that. As a leader, you can get training into that team. Hopefully you can get budget for it, but you can get training and expertise into that team. So that's the way you hire and it's the way you train. Inconsistent processes and practices across teams. That one's debatable. You got to let the team self-organize, self-manage. So there could be differences, but there also needs to be a lot of commonality between the teams, the way they're measured and the way they perform. Lack of business and product owner availability is another big one. That's how is that entity working with this entity? It's another area. I've had product owners that were really performing more like BAs than actual product owners. How well is that going on? And you can sort of see the rest that are here. Just to point out one thing, I did this survey a while back. I pulled it up again. And you'll notice that company philosophy or culture at odds with core agile values is actually went from 53 now, and before it was 63. So culture's changing. People are starting to understand agile and adopt it a little bit easier, and the culture's shifting a little bit, which is good to see. So one more Edward Demling quote: "Everyone is already doing their best. The problems are with the system. Only management can change the system because they control the policies, the tools, and the different things that affect the system." Right. So.
Hey, John, there's a little disruptive pineapple here to let you know that we have about 4 minutes, so to leave a little bit for Q&A.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, and this was the last slide actually. So
Okay, awesome.
I actually wanted it went a little bit longer than I planned, but sorry about that. So, but you know, I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation. I hope you got a little bit out of it. That was my intent. But yeah, let's go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Yeah. Hey, John, I think, and I guess when you talked about the larger shared meeting where teams came in to talk about their sprint commitments, we had a question just that didn't quite catch all the details there. So I think that's something that was company-wide, and then maybe the frequency to that, was that something that happens often where you're having multiple teams come in to share, or is this sort of a one-off thing?
It was once per sprint. So the cadence we had there was a 2-week, and it alternated with a second meeting of some of the key people, PO, Scrum Master, where, so 1 week we would have that meeting, and the next week we would have a sort of an intake process meeting where we're talking about longer term things coming in, what's the health of those, and were they being refined properly, and making sure that our pipeline of work was really healthy. So we alternated those 2 meetings, but it was a 2-week cadence.
Okay. And was there, I think we see this different in a lot of different companies, but in terms of, I guess when you're looking at transparency throughout the organization, was there mostly you know, Scrum team members involved in that? Was there management involved in that? What level did that go up to?
Scrum team, yeah, everybody was there. So the Scrum team's sort of there, hearing their report and how healthy they were. Management was there to respond. So yeah, it was a pretty big meeting, and it was the entire Scrum of Scrum. So everybody, all the Scrum teams on this one product attended together.
That could get quite large.
It was, but it was done pretty quick.
Awesome. We do only have 2 minutes. I know Anna wanted to make sure that she gave an outro. If anyone else has a question, I know John is available on LinkedIn. I will be sharing the presentation recording through the Derby City Agile Meetup group, as well as on LinkedIn. So, Anna, we got 60 seconds. If you want to take us out, go for it.
Okay, I would love to. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and Ruby had a really good time. And you know, I'll share with the group our upcoming classes. It is Chet's last year of teaching. He's going to retire, and I think everybody knows he's the first to sign the Agile Manifesto. He helped create XP. He truly is a legend. So I'll drop some classes that he has coming up. And again, we want to thank everybody and thank John. We just really love your support. We're now over 1,300 members from literally all over the world. And if you are local, mark April 22nd, we're going to bring a little happy hour together for the group, and we could talk about agility and share war stories, and, or I should say that. And I'll leave on that note. So thank you all so much. And Ruby says goodbye. And John, thank you again. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jay.
Thank you all.
And thank you to all our people that joined. I mean, there's so many of our supporters that, you know, I saw on here. So I love you all. And, you know, we just really thank you.